I am so delighted today to introduce my guest, Grammy Award-winning composer, producer, and musician Paul Avgerinos. A major figure in the field of New Age music, Avgerinos has recorded over 24 CDs in the New Age genre. In 2014, his album Bhakti received a Grammy nomination for Best New Age Album. In 2015, Avgerinos' album Grace won the Grammy for Best New Age Album. As a composer, Avgerinos has also worked on over 100 film, television, and cable projects for HBO, PBS, and Lifetime, among others. His most recent album releases include 2016's Amma, Devotional Songs to the Divine Mother, 2017's Home, Where Everyone is Welcome, a collaboration with Deepak Chopra and Kabir Sehgal, and 2018's Mindfulness. Paul, such a pleasure to have you on the show for the first time.
Oh, thank you very much, Nikhil. It's wonderful to be able to speak with you.
Other interviewers have done an admirable job of exploring your overall philosophy towards music and life. I'm very curious about the nuts and bolts of the music. I believe there's a lot unsaid about your craft and method, which is why I'm so thrilled to be able to talk to you today. Allow me the opportunity to delve into your past as a musician. So, how old were you when you first started music?
Well, that was back in the early 70s. I was probably about 11, 12 when I started getting serious about music. And by the mid-70s, I started getting very excited about electronic music because that was a brand new field at that time. You know, synthesizers were being made by Moog and Putney, and I was lucky enough to have a small synthesizer in my high school, where I went to Wilton High School. The music department had the resources to buy a little Putney synthesizer from England. And I spent a lot of time with that little Putney. I was fascinated by the possibilities of electronic music. And of course, the words New Age music were not in our vocabulary yet. And electronic music was considered an oddity and a kind of a side thing. You know, who knew that it was going to become the heart of popular music in a mere 20 years.
Paul, do you have perfect pitch?
No, I don't, Nikhil. I have a fairly good sense of relative relationships. I can usually guess, like by comparing it to my lowest note I can sing or some reference point. I can usually get close, but I don't have that particular gift.
Prior to the age of 11 and 12, were you doing anything musical? Did you have a private piano teacher or private trumpet teacher?
No, I didn't. I took some trumpet lessons through the school and fooled around with my aunt's guitar and my mother's piano, but I wasn't one of those kids, who started piano at 4 years old.
Right.
And, all that, definitely not one of those kids.
What records did you listen to as a child and teenager growing up, and what music was important to you as a child? Right.
Well, the all-powerful adolescence, which raises its head in a boy's life around 12, 13, with all kinds of frightening emotions and adrenaline and testosterone coursing through our bodies. That was pretty intense, and I found that music was a balance for that. It helped me to process my emotions. And I, like a lot of kids, musical kids, I had rock bands. I played bass in rock bands, and I sang. But by the time I got to about 15 or so, I discovered yoga and spirituality. And then I discovered John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Ah, that's right. Let me read a quote of yours that you've said about John McLaughlin. You said, "One of the artists that really took me to a whole other level was Mahavishnu John McLaughlin, who I heard when I was 16. At first, I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't even understand what he was doing, but it just seemed so complicated and sophisticated. But of course, I grew into it, and he's one of the main reasons why I went to music professionally."
Yeah, it's very true. It was one of those experiences that's just, you can say, is truly transformational. It just blew my mind. I remember I was in a regular rock band rehearsal, and my friend one of my guitar player friends brought over this record, this vinyl record of The Inner Mounting Flame by John McLaughlin, Mahavishnu Orchestra, and he puts it on. He says, "Paul, listen to this," and he puts it on. And my first reaction was like, "What is this?" It's like I couldn't even. Is this music? Or it's like it was just so bizarre and so like from another world. It was like he brought it from an alien spaceship. It just. And of course, my first reaction, I was kind of I was intimidated. I was like, "What is he doing?" It's all these complicated chords and rhythms, and oh my God, listen to him play that guitar. I've never heard anybody play the guitar with that kind of skill. And next thing you know, we decided to form a Mahavishnu Orchestra tribute band, and we actually learned their songs, and we were playing them at the local high school dances. Of course, the kids were like, "What is this?" We're like, "We can't dance to this." So that didn't go over too well with our public.
Wait a second, Paul. At 15 or 16, just the attempt to play something like that is shows that you were at some pretty decent level as a musician. So how were you completely self-taught, or did you have a teacher that kind of taught you the theory of how to put songs together and form and that kind of thing?
No, I really didn't have any serious teaching until I got to Peabody Conservatory about when I was 18 or so. I had a few private teachers to help me learn a little bit about the bass violin, the electric bass, the trumpet, but I didn't really have, a really serious tutorial in music. It's mostly self-taught. I gravitated towards things that excited me, like Mahavishnu, and I would just learn, just by practicing. I would unpack it and figure out, well, what notes is he playing, what chords is he playing.
So you'd sit down and try and transcribe it by ear?
Oh, yeah. We'd play it on a tape recorder at half speed, so we could learn it note by note. And of course, I had help from my friends in the band who would say, oh, I can show you how to play that chord. This is where you put your fingers. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of notes in that chord.
I'm so fascinated by how organic it was for you and how self-directed. That's really fascinating.
Well, yeah, the important takeaway, Nikhil, is that it was one and the same with my spiritual exploration. In other words, I was very excited about learning about spirituality, studying Hinduism and yoga, and I became a devotee of an Indian guru, the same guru of McLaughlin.
That's right. There's an amazing story where you actually bumped into that person right in your home state.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was just meant to be that every week Sri Chinmoy would come to Norwalk. He was living in Queens, New York, and he would come to Norwalk, Connecticut, which was literally, 5 miles from where I was growing up. So I could go and visit him. It was meant to be. And so my excitement about music and my spiritual awakening were really one and the same to me. I looked at music as my spiritual sadhana, my practice, a part of my practice besides yoga and meditation and prayer. But it was a big part of my spiritual awakening was learning how to make sophisticated, spiritually powerful music that would affect people's vibration level. So, the two were hand in hand. I didn't separate them in my mind like, oh, this is spirituality and this is music. I was really only interested in music that had spiritual power. And I was, it was a big part of my path. In other words, I was discovering my dharma, my purpose in life.
How did that lead you then to enrolling in the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University?
Well, I was playing rock and roll, and then once I discovered McLaughlin, I was playing jazz rock fusion and all that. But I quickly burnt out on the rock music and the pop music, and I just decided, that's not going to go anywhere for me spiritually. And I didn't feel like I was drawn to live a life in the jazz rock fusion like Mahavishnu John McLaughlin was doing. And so my heart told me that if I wanted to be a truly competent musician and composer and producer, I needed to get some real training. And so I thought, well, where's a good place to get some real training? the classical world, because, you know, you have that whole history stretching back 400 or 500 years. You study Palestrina and medieval music and the Renaissance and the Baroque and the classical and the Romantic and the Impressionistic. And so, you know, my heart told me, you need to get some real training. You know a little bit, but you're not well-rounded. You know, you really don't know very much. You're just kind of going on bits and pieces.
Now, you were a full scholarship honor student at Peabody?
Yeah, well, that's another miraculous story that it was just meant to be. So this is a funny story, Nikhil. This is a true and funny story. So, you know, also my mother was saying, like, you know, I was a little bit listless, 17, graduated high school. I wasn't really sure what to do. So my mother said, well, you've got to do something. So I said, well, there's this bass violin teacher. I was already starting my classical studies in bass violin, and he lives in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. He teaches at the Casals Institute there in Puerto Rico, and he's invited me to go down there. So how about I go down there and study bass with him? And it's just like, well, you know, I don't know, this sounds crazy, but you got to do something. So I went down there and I studied with him. He didn't speak a lick of English, and my Spanish was not very good, but I was learning. I did learn some very important things about process and about self-discipline and how to teach yourself, which is really what classical training is all about. So teach you how to teach yourself.
Were you a good sight reader at the time? Were you able to read pretty comfortably?
Yeah, I was okay. I was pretty good. I was getting along, but I was a little bit cocky. I was playing pieces that were too advanced and my technique wasn't solid enough. So he kind of did a boot camp where he broke me down. He said, look, you got to correct your technique errors so that when you go to play the harder pieces, you play them with confidence and with strength of technique.
And what pieces are we talking about here?
Oh, the hardest pieces for bass violin, like the Bottesini Concerto in B minor, the very hardest things. I was, trying to showboat them, and I was playing them basically on adrenaline and bravura. My technique wasn't really up to it, but I was just doing it. I was playing them with passion, and I could play a lot of it well, but not all of it because my technique wasn't up to the task. I was cheating, I was just kind of making up tricks to try to play the most difficult pieces. So after about a season there, I realized, okay, I've got to go to a big mainstream conservatory if I want to continue. At that point, my goal was to be a principal bass of a major symphony orchestra. So I said, well, you've got to get to a better school. So I sent out from Puerto Rico, I made a little recording of me playing the bass violin with this nice lady playing the harpsichord. And you could hear the crickets chirping outside in the window. It was very magical, I made a 1/4-inch tape recording of me playing. And I sent the tape to Indiana University, Hart School of Music, because Gary Carr taught there. He was, the great virtuoso bassist, taught there at the time. And I sent it to Peabody. And the answer came back. They all accepted me, but only Peabody offered the scholarship, and which I needed because we didn't have any money. My father was like, well, if you want to go to music school, you're going to have to figure that out because, this is, my father's an engineer. It seemed very frivolous to him. So Peabody came back with, we're going to give you this huge scholarship. And we always thought that maybe they thought I was from Puerto Rico and they were fulfilling a minority quotient. But there you go. I mean, what a strange circuitous path. But that's the way the divine works. It's like we're all brought where we need to go one way or another. So can you describe your conservatory days? Were you majoring in performance because you mentioned that you wanted to be a principal bass player? Yeah, I was. I focused on performance. That was my goal. It was very simple. I wanted to become the principal bass of a major symphony orchestra. And I focused on that, and I worked very hard, and I did lots of gigs while I was in conservatory. I was working every week at several different gigs. I sang in a paid choir. I played in the opera company. I played in the Baltimore Symphony. I played in the theater company. I played at the jazz club, dance with electric bass. I played in rock parties with the electric bass. I just worked really hard. And before I even graduated, I was offered principal bass of the Hong Kong Philharmonic. And so I left in my spring of my senior year to go join that orchestra in 1980.
So you traveled to Hong Kong?
Yeah, I was offered the job there. That was my goal, principal bass of a major world symphony orchestra. And so, God gives us where our heart, if our desire is pure and strong, manifestation happens. I was 100% focused on that goal. Other kids were going to parties and having fun and they dating and stuff. But no, I was just, this is my goal. I'm going to achieve this goal. And so it manifested before I even graduated school.
Now, I wanted to ask you, Paul, throughout this entire time, when did you start composing? You studied theory, I suppose, in Peabody, and did that inform compositionally your development?
It did. Yes, Peabody is wonderful because there's 4 years of music history and 4 years of music theory for everyone, no matter what your major. And so it was very illuminating. And I started composing at Peabody. I wrote, by hand. I started writing like little quartets and quintets and little pieces. And I wasn't very good at it for sure, but I was developing the vocabulary, and I was developing the knowledge of the history of music, so that when I finally, went to do the music I cared about, which was healing, gentle, uplifting New Age music, I had all that depth of knowledge, and I could think of, look at those pretty chords that Debussy used or Ravel used, or look at how Palestrina wrote these magnificent flowing polyphonies, the counterpoint, So, for someone like me, it was just probably one of the biggest growth periods in my life. I just learned so much. At a school like that, there's so many kids that are amazingly talented, so much more talented than me and so much more gifted. And that's very inspiring, It makes you helps you to grow much more quickly because you have such a rich environment.
Now, you were a principal bass player, but with composition, did you use piano as well to help you compose?
Yeah, in the beginning, I just wrote for whatever instruments seemed appealing at the time, and small forces, because then I could get them performed. Like, if I wrote a woodwind quintet, I could corral some kids to play it, so I could actually hear it. If you write a full orchestral score, it's still harder to convince the orchestra to come together for Paul's orchestra score. They're like, well, no, actually, we're playing Beethoven and Brahms and Rachmaninoff today. We don't have any time for Paul.
Now, you've had really a great career as a principal bass player. You played with Isaac Stern, Jean-Pierre Rampal, the Buart's Trio, Berezhnikov. Just any interesting anecdotes you want to share before we jump to another topic?
Well, it was a funny time with Isaac Stern once. We were playing, he was playing a Mozart violin concerto with the Annapolis Symphony, and I was principal bass of that. That was when I was at Peabody. And this young man brazenly came up to the front with his camera and started, in the middle of the performance, he started snapping pictures of Isaac Stern playing the solo violin. And Isaac just stopped the whole performance in the middle of a bow stroke. And he pointed at the kid. He says, "You leave." And the kid just bent over and he shuffled out of the auditorium. And then he turned to the conductor, was the pianist. He said, "Maestro, from the top." So we went back to the beginning and we started over again. That was funny.
Now, this led you to popular music as well, because you've performed with Charles Aznavour, Liza Minnelli, even Buddy Rich. How did you start performing with these more popular acts?
Well, it's interesting that after a few years in the orchestra, I had another transformation where I was having trouble seeing myself staying there for the rest of my life, which was very strange because, I had such a strong desire to get there. But then once I got there, I thought I was starting to feel like, well, I don't know if this is it. I think I'm destined to do something else. And so when I started to slow that world down and leave that world, I had to do something. And so I was introduced to a wonderful friend in New York. Bob Cranshaw is a great bass player. He was the first music director of Saturday Night Live, and he's played on like 1,000 Blue Note records and Ornette Coleman and all those great guys. And he's a sweet fellow, and he likes helping young players. And I went to him, and without even hearing me play, he said, well, Buddy needs a bass player tomorrow, so go down to such and such, and he'll get on the bus and go play with Buddy at Princeton. And I was like, Buddy Rich? He said, yeah, he's kind of intense, but, just... And then another time he said, well, this French singer, Charles Aznavour, he's doing a tour of the U.S. and I can't go. So why don't you go? You go to Los Angeles next week and they'll take care of you. Don't worry about it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, again,
can you talk about the Buddy Rich gig? How did that go?
That was not one of my finest moments, I have to say. He's pretty intense to play for. And of course, I heard all the stories about how hard it was to keep up with him, so I was a little scared going in. But it was I did the best I could, and I think if I'd been a little older and more mature, I think I would have handled it better. But it was great to get to play with him. It was amazing.
Were you familiar with that swing style versus the classical training that you've had?
Yeah, I was blessed that growing up 7th grade through 12th grade, we had a big band program in our school. Because my older brother, 4 years older, had started the big band program in the Wilton school system. So when I got there, I was able to play for 6 years, big band. So by the time I graduated high school, I could, walk into a big band job as a bass player without any problem. Yeah, because I'd been doing it for 6 years. So... But that's because of my older brother, George. He started that program, him and a friend, convinced the band director. He said, let's start a big band. And the director was like, oh, okay, let's do it. So my brother, he got the music together. He brought the musicians, and they all learned how to do it. And they learned how to play How High the Moon and all the rest of it.
And how was the experience with Charles Aznavour?
Oh, that was really great. I mean, he was very generous. He was like a second father to me, very generous and kind, and he paid us well. He took good care of us. We had wonderful tours all over the place, all over the world, actually. And he moved near me while I was still working for him. He was living in L.A., and then at some point he moved to Greenwich, Connecticut. It was right down the road from me. And so I would go visit him, and he'd teach me about songwriting and work ethic of being a composer. And that was really inspiring to see him. Every morning he'd get up and write a song at 6 a.m., whether he wanted to or not. Every day he would write a song. And he said, Paul, you see, if you write a song every day, you're going to write a few hit songs eventually. It's like monkeys, eventually going to type Shakespeare. And he's right. I've told all my people that I mentor, my clients, my young students and stuff, I say, you got to show up. You have to have a work ethic. If you want to write great songs, you got to write them every day. And then eventually some of those songs will be great. It's just going to happen. But you can't sit down and say, oh, I'm going to write a great song or a great composition. You have to write all the time. And then the universe will decide what's great and what's not so great. Like all of us in this world, we have that experience where, we work really hard on this project and then we work less hard on this other project. And the project we worked less hard on becomes more successful, much more successful, because there's something in it. Yeah, some kind of magical moment happened that connects with the people. And so you just have to show up and do the work because you don't know which project is going to be the most successful. It's a mysterious process.
No, I'm trying to get a timeline here. So you built a Studio Unicorn in 1984. And where does that position itself according to your performances after your graduation?
Right. So it was basically, a classical orchestra, and then that died down. And then I was doing like pop and jazz to earn a living. And then I was like, well, what I really want to do is do this new age music and produce my own music. So I need a recording studio to do that. So I built a little basement studio, but I kept playing gigs, to pay the bills. I would keep playing whatever gigs I could get my hands on and doing a little teaching until the studio got successful enough that eventually I could stop doing gigs and stop doing teaching. And that took till about, the year 2000.
Right.
By about 2000, the studio was cooking pretty well. I was getting a lot of clients and done a lot of new age albums, and it was starting to come together. So I stopped all the gigging. Because that, was never my long-term goal. My goal was to, the original goal was to do this healing new age music. Back in 74, I wanted to do that, but there wasn't a way to do it because, first of all, the genre didn't exist yet. So, but in the 80s, by the middle of the 80s, it started becoming a genre, it became a thing. I remember when I started my studio, one of my clients was a cassette duplicator. You used to have those audio cassettes, analog tape, right? And so I was working for him, and one of his clients said, "Hey, do you want to do some new age albums for us? We need more albums." And I said, "Oh, I would love to do that." So again, it was just meant to be, right? And that was New World Productions from England, and they had a branch here in Connecticut.
So it was called New Age music at the time, or what was the...
Yeah, the middle of the 80s, it started becoming a phrase. New Age music became like a genre, and the first New Age Grammy was given in, I guess it was 86. Yeah. And so it was becoming a known thing. It was like a scene that you could get involved in. And so I did 4 cassette tape albums for this New World Productions. And, they weren't really very great. There's some nice moments in there, but, I was just starting. And that's how we grow, is by, you have to make an album and then hear it later and go, well, this was good, but I could do this part better. And so you take the good and hopefully grow forward with with what you learn from each project.
Now, you're a multi-instrumentalist. You play keyboards, you're trained on the bass, but you play guitar as well. How many instruments do you play, and how did you pick them up? And also, how familiar are you with playing Eastern instruments, which seem to be very popular on New Age recordings?
Well, I think I'm most comfortable with strings. Anything that has strings on it, like guitars, basses, lutes, sitars, drones, santurs, sarangis. Anything with strings, I just feel like a tactile connection because I can touch the string and pluck it or bow it. So it's very visceral. Whereas piano is a little more cerebral because, you're doing different things with each hand. So I can play piano, I'm okay, but things with strings, my soul can come through. Like a cello, I can pick it up and make a beautiful sound. I may not be able to play, a great cello concerto, but I can make a beautiful, simple melody. So, it's about following your heart with instruments. I'm not very drawn. I can play the flute, the oboe, the clarinet, the saxophone, but I'm not drawn to it, So I don't have the desire to play them. I've always been very drawn to string instruments the most. And of course, the electronics. For me, the whole world of electronics in music, ProTools and plugins and virtual instruments and synthesizers, software synthesizers and hardware synthesizers, to me, that's a whole world that I cherish because you can achieve high levels of richness and complexity by, playing, like, for instance, if you play 8 or 9 different synthesizers with the same chords, you can develop a very rich texture that's, to me, is as satisfying as any orchestral layering. So, and that excitement started back in the 70s, even though, the synthesizers were very crude and primitive in the 70s. I could see the possibility. I could see it that if you layered these together in the right way, like we heard Switched on Bach, Wendy Carlos, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Listen to these sounds.
I wanted to ask you that, Paul. So for people who don't know, what are some really influential albums that really shaped the direction of the music?
Well, yeah, there's two that jump to mind. Switched on Bach by at that time it was Walter Carlos, and now Wendy Carlos. But that's a seminal album. I think it came out in '69 or so, and it just shook the world of music and musicians. And people like me, very young and impressionable, were just very blown away by that album. We were like, oh my God, this is so cool. How did he do this? And it was an amazing accomplishment because it was a monophonic synth. It could only play one note at a time. You had to tune it every 30 seconds because it kept going out of tune. And you had to fuss with it day and night. And he recorded it all on tape recorders. So it's just monumental. So
the album, just for my listeners, it's an album. It's a collection of pieces by J.S. Bach, performed by Carlos and Benjamin Folkman on a Moog synthesizer. And it was pretty famous in bringing synthesizers to popular music.
Yeah, it shook. It just, there are many people like me who are active now who were so inspired by that album. we were like, did you hear that? It's like, oh my God, how did he do that? That's so cool. Because especially for people that are studying classical music and are interested in electronics, we were like, oh my gosh, because the precision and the clarity that he brought out to this, the amazing compositions of Bach, which are so meticulous and so mathematically perfect, it was a great match, right? Because the clarity and precision of the electronics, it brought out the divine brilliance of the great Bach compositions even more for me because of the precision. When you hear Brandenburg Concerto played by a great chamber orchestra, it's very beautiful, but there are some aspects of it that are actually still a little sloppy because the music is really, really hard. Bach wrote, he wasn't concerned about whether you could play it or not. When he wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier, he wasn't thinking like, oh, I should dumb it down a little here because this is going to be hard for Paul to play. No, he was going the other way. He was saying, yeah, exactly. This music, God is giving me this music. I'm just writing it down.
Well, Bach was a very devout person himself. There's a lot of dedications to God on a lot of the manuscripts.
Oh, yeah. He was a great, great soul, and while having like 15 kids too. I mean, he was just amazing, completely amazing human being. I mean, it's just.
I'm actually going to ask you later about your favorite composers, but you mentioned there was a second recording that was pretty important.
Yeah, there was Tomita did an album called Snowflakes Are Dancing, which explored the world of Debussy and impressionistic composers with the ARP 2600 with the electronic music. And that came after Carlos's seminal work. But because he was exploring the impressionistic music, that really sparked my connection to New Age, because New Age has its roots in the impressionistic music of 100 years ago, because Ravel and Debussy, Satie, it's gentle,
very mood-like,
moody, dreamy. That whole vibe that they were exploring became a bedrock for a starting point, for our work. And so when I heard the Debussy done with electronics, I thought, oh, wow, this is very powerful to me. It really moved me. And so I listened to that record endlessly. Especially when I was in Hong Kong, I remember that it was one of my favorite recordings when I was working in the orchestra.
What did your colleagues think of all these reinterpreted classical pieces? It must have been controversial, right, at the time?
Yeah, it was, Nikhil. Some people hated it, and they were very vocal about it. My mother didn't like it. She was like, that electronic music is too cold, it's too clinical, and music is an art. It's subjective at the end of the day. One person's treasure can be another person's junk. It's that's one of the beauties of the arts, is that there's something for everyone, and our feelings change over time. I don't listen to those albums now like I did then. I listen to different stuff now. So, I think as we go through life, our tastes change, and, that's a beautiful, beautiful aspect. Sometimes the music, I call it cathartic music, like Mahavishnu's music and Switched on Bach. For me, those were cathartic albums, which they just took me to a whole new place and opened up my mind and opened up my heart. And, it was only for a few years that I was deeply engrossed in those albums, but it changed me. It opened me up to possibilities. And so I call that cathartic music. I think all of us in the music world, we have those cathartic albums, that it's just like a sea change, you can remember, I wasn't the same person after I experienced that.
I'm very interested now in your compositional method. Let me read you a quote of yours. You said, "On a more practical level, I have great patience and focus, the ability to work on the same 3 minutes of music for 10 hours straight without losing the focus of classical perfection. I have been known to spend weeks on the same piece of music. This would drive most people crazy, but for me, it is my spiritual path and fulfillment." Give an example of working on something for just endlessly, just shaping it and perfecting it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a big part of my process because my music is very simple theoretically. There's a few chords, some rhythms, some melodies. The actual elements are very simple. But what I spend the time on is levels of nuance, shadings of color. How well can I blend this shaker with the sound of this drone? Or, so for me, it's all about painting with sound, painting with texture, and that takes a lot of patience. So right now I'm working on a devotional album for this year. One of my projects this year will come out in the fall. We'll have Krishna Das singing on it, and Wah, and Donna DeLore, and maybe even Diva Primal. And so I'm working on the tracks right now, making the foundations. Yesterday I was working on one piece for about 10 hours. And, I spent about an hour fussing with one particular keyboard sound because I was trying to get just the right texture to go with this particular piece. And then once I got that, then of course I'm still fussing with the chords, and the right performance of them and the right positioning, because each step leads to the next one. It's like a puzzle, and once you get one piece to fit in well, then it helps you figure out what the next piece will be. It's very methodical, and you have to have a lot of faith because when you start out, there's nothing. It's just a blank slate,
That's, it's so fascinating because when I listened to Grace and I was listening to it and enjoying it, and I was thinking to myself, there's a lot actually really going on. Every second is calculated. The production, I believe, is incredibly complicated. Let me read another quote of yours. You said, "I am a create-it-in-the-studio kind of guy for the most part. I love the spontaneity and magical synchronicity of the studio environment. So many wonderful tools and instruments to inspire and explore." Now, what are these tools? Do you use ProTools? What are the things that you use a lot?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, nowadays it's Pro Tools, and it's the virtual synthesizer plugins and the effect processing plugins. In the old days, it was a lot of outboard, rack-mounted synthesizers, hardware synthesizers, which we program and control through MIDI and patch the audio back through the mixing board. But now I still use those, but now the heart of the activity is all inside the computer in terms of sound manipulation and of production and manipulation. And so it's incredibly rich and deep capabilities are presented by the computer now, which are capabilities we never had before. One instance of Omnisphere, which is a virtual synthesizer, can play 32 different synthesizer programs at the same time. So I can I can play a C major chord, a triad, C, E, and G, and have 32 different synthesizers responding to that completely different ways. That's like if you're standing in front of the orchestra and you say, okay, everybody play a C, right? But, there's the first violins, the seconds, the violas, the cellos, the basses, the flutes, the clarinets, the French horns, the timpani. Everybody plays their version of a C. It's pretty powerful, that one note, right? Because you got, 100 men and women playing one note. That's powerful.
Are you so familiar with all the instruments and all the sounds and the tones and the timbres that you are so instinctively able to reach for these sounds? Is that something that you have such a vocabulary of timbre and tone in your palate, in your head, that you can just, it's so quick for you?
That's a really great question, because it's the very heart of what I focus on. You hit the nail on the head. I'm always playing with the timbral aspects of what is already known. In other words, let's say on the Grace album, I developed a pad that uses 12 different synthesizers. So when I play the chords, let's say I play a C in the right hand, and in the left hand I play octave Fs. So it's a C over an F, which is like a sus kind of a feel. It's kind of it's a floating kind of a magical chord. But now, let's say, the pinnacle of where I got that pad on the Grace album, that's like the starting point. When I go to work on mindfulness, I have that available. I can call that up in Omnisphere, and I can turn on all the outboard synthesizers and get right back to where I was. But now I'm like, well, I want to take that somewhere a little different. I want to take it further or make it more interesting to me. And so I'll start fussing with, well, what if I change this synthesizer in this way? And so in terms of vocabulary, I think of like warmer, deeper, more euphoric. It's hard to put it into words. It's something more that I fuss with it until it feels right, until it gives me that feeling of contented equanimity, a feeling of being in deep meditation, or, a very satisfying oral landscape. So, yeah, it's interesting that the words can often fail, which of course is why we do music, because music is so much more eloquent than words.
Well, I really hope that my audience, when they listen to Grace or Mindfulness or Bhakti, they really look out for these things, to listen to the nice gradations and nuance of what's happening, because it is really fascinating and really wonderful to. Now, the fact that you're saying it makes me want to, after this interview, jump on and listen again to the album and have another second take.
Yeah, that's one of my goals when I'm working, is I want to make the production rich enough and nuanced enough so that if you listen to it 10 years from now or 20 years from now, it will reveal some more charms or offer you some more gifts that you didn't notice the first time. That's a big part of my process. It's like, how many angels can I get dancing on the head of this pin? I'm always Yeah. So I turn this down a little, I turn this up a little, oh, turn that down a little more, make this a little warmer, cut 1,000 here, cut 2,000 here. I'm talking about equalization and frequencies. Compress this sound a little more because it's sticking out too much. Pan this sound a little more to the left so it doesn't conflict with this sound. Take this sound over here and put it through a flanger and put that through a delay and then send that into a big reverb. But now that's too loud, so you got to turn that down. Put a stereo expander on this because it needs to come outside of the speakers. It's too much in the center, and on and on and on and on. And you're talking about several thousand of these decisions going on every session, explorations, try this, try that.
You're self-taught? Did you teach yourself all these technical terms, and did you read a manual? Did you have a producer friend who helped you with any of this, or how did you teach yourself?
Yeah, I'm self-taught, and I think that it took me a little longer to learn the technical side of it because I was self-taught, and I wasn't able to get an apprenticeship in a big studio, and I didn't live in the city where there were big studios to go to. And so I did have to teach myself. So it took a little longer to get where I needed to get. But yeah, it doesn't matter. I think as long as you get there, that's the important thing.
Now, compositionally, you've said in an interview, the feeling drives you. And so if you hit a chord that you don't know classically how to analyze it, it just happens. Can you take me through a compositional, not so much the production, but the chords? Do you like quiet everything down and just play around with a keyboard? What is your main modality for composition?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say it depends on the kind of piece. So if you take a piece like Well of Souls, it's on Muse of the Round Sky. It came out in 1990. That one, I was visiting a friend, and I came home and I was in a good mood. I felt joyful. I had a friend, and life was good. And I sat down at the keyboard and I turned on the MIDI recorder and I just started improvising. And out came this piece, the chord progression from Well of Souls. And it was very mysterious and haunting and magical and complicated. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And after I got done, with the excitement of building up the track, the basic track, I went back and I tried to analyze it, and say, well, what chords are those? And after the very first chord, I couldn't analyze them. It was beyond my knowledge. It was basically Wagnerian chromatic harmony, which is that kind of harmony that borders on the atonal, but it just keeps from going over the edge. But it was very chromatic. And so each chord was so complicated, I couldn't analyze it. But I always tell people this. I say, go with your heart, your gut. Don't try to think music. Just feel it. Because if you just let your fingers wander around the keyboard with surrendered awareness, in other words, I surrender to a higher power, play through me, sing through me, come through me, use this body, use these fingers to make some beautiful music, you would come up with some amazing colors and textures which are way beyond definition. It's like a 6-note chord. You can't give it a name. Well, it's a C major 7 with an add 2, add 4, flat 5. It's like, it doesn't mean anything anymore, the words.
So you don't think like that then? So for you, those analyses is not a part of your compositional process?
Right, most of the time, except right now, see, I'm doing a very traditional, more pop-type devotional album. And so the chord progressions need to be comfortable to the average listener. So I'm deliberately thinking, okay, I'm in C major. What are my options? Okay, I've got the F, the G, the D minor, the A minor. These are my basic chords, my 1, my 5, my 4, my 2, my 6. And so I'm thinking, much more practical, much more simple and accessible. So see, it depends on the job, on the work. This album, I don't want it to be too deep in terms of harmonic language. It's more of a groovy, fun, happy album with fun rhythms, and you can dance to it, and it's a completely different animal than Well of Souls. So you have to bring the technique to the project that's appropriate. If you use the wrong technique, it's like using a chainsaw to brush your teeth. It's a great tool, but it's not meant for that. Or it's like trying to cut a tree down with a toothbrush. It's not going to work very well.
Now, for new listeners who are interested in you, can you recommend starting points for them? Any pieces that you'd like to highlight for new listeners who are very interested in your work?
Well, I think it's letting your heart guide you. If you like the deep electronic space music, it's healing spaces, you might like Mindfulness and Grace and Bliss and Love and albums like that. Or if you like the world music vibe, you might like Garden of Delight or Bhakti. And but my website, roundskymusic.com, is a good resource, a starting point. ROUNDSKY music, roundskymusic.com. And of course, Spotify, places like that. You can hear all my catalog in there. Avgerinos, Avgerinos, Paul Avgerinos.
And what you mentioned, an upcoming project that you were creating for this year?
Yeah, well, I have two projects. So one coming out in March, which is exciting, is with Deepak Chopra. This is the 25th year anniversary of his famous book, The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success, which is, one of the most beloved New Age books and the most successful books of all time, The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success. So we're doing musical meditations on the Seven Spiritual Laws. That's coming out March 21st, first day of spring. And then the album I'm working on right now, I'm hoping for August, September. And that's going to feature Krishna Das, the amazing kirtan singer. And this is going to be a fun album. It's danceable and upbeat. The idea is that, there's a lot of great devotional music. And there's a lot of great up dance music for exercising and, being active, but there's not music that's danceable and devotional. So if you want to work out, but you don't want to listen to, club music, you want to hear something a little more spiritually uplifting, that this album will fit the bill. So it's, we're always looking for albums that fulfill a need. We look at what's out there and we say, well, what is not being offered to people that they could find useful? And that's what good producers do, because you don't want to make the same album that there's 1,000 of that already. You want to make something that is fulfilling a need. You think of a great producer told me many years ago, he said, Paul, before you make an album, answer 3 questions. Who's going to listen to this album? What are they going to be doing while they're listening to it? And how is it going to serve them? And he said, if you don't know the answer to those 3 questions, you're not ready to start yet, and you should not start yet, because you're just going to make a mumbo jumbo, right? Because you don't have a style guide. You got to have a style guide. You have to have a vision, a 30,000-foot vision of, what's this album? What is it? Is it a cat, a dog, a rabbit, a carrot, cauliflower? What is this thing you're making? And who is it going to serve? Very important. God bless Brian Keene for teaching me that. He told me that about 20 years ago, and it took me 10 years to implement it. Because that's how it works with great teachings,
Yeah.
They can tell you something in one sentence, but it might take you 20 years or all of your life to try to implement it,
Well, I can't wait to hear your upcoming albums, Paul, and it's really been a pleasure to talk to you. And let's end off on a final question, Paul. Can you give any advice to a young musician who's interested in being a part of the music industry, and just share some advice that you have for a young person?
Yes, well, I would say the most important thing is to work as hard as you possibly can while remaining humble and open to whatever possibilities the universe brings. So you may have it in your heart to be a great jazz musician, but you're offered a job in a reggae band. Don't turn it down, because that might lead to something else which ends up fulfilling your heart's desire. The universe is mysterious, and often the way we go somewhere is not the straight route; it's a circuitous. We go in a wave-like motion. So you have to be very humble and hardworking and open-minded, because the universe wants to fulfill your desire, but the more flexible you are, the more chances the universe has to help you. So you explore all the options. You call all the people, you try all the jobs in that subgenre or whatever. It's all about staying the course and showing up. You have to keep showing up and making your best effort, even when things are not going well. If you're going through a frustrating period, you have to have a long-term vision, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Don't expect things to happen overnight. You might get some surprising success quickly, but you may instead have more of a slow burn, which is what most of us experience. So at the end of the day, it's about following your heart and working very hard.
Thank you for that, Paul. That was really wonderful. And I hope you had a good time on the interview, as I really, really enjoyed this one.
This has been one of my favorite ever. Thank you so much for doing so much research and being so knowledgeable and prepared. I think you're amazing. If everyone did as great a job as you, we'd have even much better interviews.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Well, Paul, I hope to have you back when your next album is released. We can chat some more. And thanks again so much for this interview, and have a great rest of the day.
My pleasure, Nikhil, and the same to you. Have a wonderful evening.